and adults need to interact in order to learn. So remember previously we've talked about adult learners, some of the characteristics. We need to engage them in conversations. They are not like bigger kids that we try to stuff the duck, right? Stuff the information to the throat and let them discover the truth themselves. So what type of questions out there? You probably know these questions already. Yes and no questions. For example, did Jonah run away from God? And these questions are great for the shy people. Sometimes they feel shy. They may not want to be, sharing too much about themselves. So these are good questions to ask the shy people. Short answer questions like, how many days did Jonah stay in the belly of the fish? So you want to ask the shy people, so this is kind of safe questions, it's not very personal. But you always try to follow up with open-ended questions. Why, what, and how. Because open-ended questions are the best type of questions to actually in-depth discussions within the group. So for example, did Jonah run away from God, and why did Jonah run away from God? Or personal questions, do you find yourself like Jonah? Have you experienced a situation when God called you to do something that was very difficult? So don't call on anyone if no one shares. The facilitator, you must first prepare. You must want to share if no one is sharing, but make sure you share it very briefly. Very, very briefly, okay? You just want to get the ball rolling, okay? Do not share for a long time that the rest of the group have no time to share. So you just want to, whenever you have a chance to share as a facilitator, just pinpoint very quickly within 1 minute, highlight a few points after you share, and then pass the ball to someone else. So, or you can, sometimes the personal questions, I will leave it at the very end as a prayer time, so people can pray in a group as they share the last question together in pairs. And I find it's very effective, especially if they have to share something very personal and struggles, and at the same time they use their time to pray for each other. The last type of question that I will always ask at the end of my Bible study is a takeaway question. What is one thing you hope to apply this week? And this is such an important question, because without applications, relevance to our life is like having spiritual constipation. So without applications in our life, it's like having spiritual constipation. It's like you learn everything in your head, but how is that going to look like in your life? And so what? So you must engage your learners to see the bridging. How can they apply what they learn that week, and how is that gonna look like in their lives? So this is an excellent question at the end to ask. Make sure you make time for it. If people feel comfortable, they be able to share it, or either share in a pairs or in a group, that one thing they've learned. And it's a great way to wrap up your session together. Without you doing the wrap up, it's someone else, everyone else in the group doing the wrap up for you. And of course, as a facilitator, you quickly highlight the key principle we have learned today, especially if the discussion gone wild. What is the big idea you want people to take away for that lesson? Also, it's very important, step number 3 is you want to start and end promptly. You must start and end promptly. Remember I said the adult learners, one of the characteristics is people are very busy. You don't want to waste people's time and respect people's time. So make sure you start and end promptly. Also keep it short. Don't ever have a Bible study last for 2 hours or 2.5 hours. And people are they will not come back for sure. So you want to make sure that icebreaker, you have an icebreaker at the beginning. As I mentioned before, is connect. Icebreaker, the purpose is to connect before content. So the selection of the icebreaker, you want to make sure it's something that will help you to get to know each other in the group. Okay, so I would say 10 to 15 minutes. And when you actually start the lesson, the discussions would be 45 to 1 hour. And remember, I just talked earlier, you always start with a launching question or launching questions that you get people interested into the topic that you talked about. So, and after that, you spend maybe 15 minutes to wrap up, and prayers, maybe pray in the smaller groups. So the whole thing should not be more than 1.5 hours maximum, especially on an online setting. I think it's also true for in-person setting. It's quite long, if anything over 1.5 hours. Also, number 5, here's some of the tips that I want to give you. How can you change your activities, make people engage throughout the lessons? Here are some of the ideas. So first of all, you want to chunk it down, your lesson down to 10 to 15 segments. For example, for a new topic, for a new point, you don't want to dwell on it more than 10 to 15 minutes, okay? That is too long if you dwell on the same point for over 10 to 15 minutes. And also, here are some of the things you can do. Be intentional. You might want to vary some of the techniques or the methods in 3 to 5 minutes, especially if you are teaching on a workshop. That's something that is either a new PowerPoint or relevant active learning activities. But don't feel like, oh, every 5 minutes I have to do something like an active, like do an exercise or something. The point is, it's just every 3 to 5 minutes you might want to ask a question to change the topic. And here's some of the ideas. Maybe you want to do a polling. Ask for the answer on a whiteboard or something, or you want to show a video, or you want to do a stretching, or it might be a 1 minute reflection time, or break into a small group to discuss, ask relevant questions, share a personal story on the topic. So the point is, you just want to vary your way of carrying out the lessons, but not to a point where people feel so busy and they don't it's hard to keep up. So you have to pray for the wisdom. If you want to do changing activities, maybe 2 to 3 activities max in a Bible study, but you want to keep asking questions every 3 to 5 minutes without feeling dull and stall in the whole teaching sessions or the facilitation session or the Bible study sessions. So here are some of the online tools that you can use if you're interested on gadget, but my experience have told me that sometimes simple is also good. So if you want to explore something new, maybe just use one thing to try out instead of doing 4 or 5 changing different platforms, because I find that people usually would get lost if you're trying to do too many things at the same time. So trying to just find using one thing. And I find that actually on the Zoom setting, their whiteboard is actually, there are a lot of basic setting on Zoom is quite sufficient. And I love the fact that it's so basic. You don't have to change platforms, and sometimes people just get lost when you are changing platforms. But it's fun to experiment some of new things if you feel like, oh, I want to try new things. But remember, just do it very sparingly and just try